Yes.
But here's the cool thing is that you, and this is what we say all the time, your goal is to raise well-adjusted, healthy adults who feel like they have the confidence and the ability to go across the world and share Jesus and teach English or whatever that is. You gave that to your kiddos.
Yeah.
And that's our goal, right? It's not to keep them in the nest forever or keep them under our thumb. And, as much as sometimes we want to do.
Rock Solid Families wants to thank Maxwell Construction for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. For over 30 years, Maxwell Construction has been a leader in turning dreams into realities, building schools, banks, restaurants, and many other commercial and public facilities. Maxwell Construction has made it their priority to not just build buildings, but to build into their community. So if you have any construction needs, call them at 812-537-2200. Welcome to the Rock Solid Family Podcast. I am joined today with two lovely ladies, my lovely wife, Linda, and our guest, Lisa. Lisa, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Yeah.
All right. So we are bringing in today Lisa Cox. Lisa has been a friend of our family, but she's going to bring a whole different insight to our conversation today. One that Linda and I would not have a great perspective on because we have not done what she has done in terms of our topic. So now I got you really thinking, don't I? All right.
Well, before we hit record,
After the earlier conversation.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you, Lisa, for being here. And yes, she has been a dear friend of ours since our kids were little. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
You were a children's minister to our little guys and passed the reign over to me. So, but Lisa, things have been going on. A lot been going on in your life lately. Give us a little update on what's been going on for you.
Well, it's been a whirlwind the last month or so. We got our youngest married off over the weekend. So our oldest has been in the country from Taiwan for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's just trying to fit all that special family time and get wedding stuff done. And so, it's been a little crazy.
So your oldest is in Taiwan. And what is he doing in Taiwan?
Currently, he's teaching English to kindergartners.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
So.
Man.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They're underachievers, people.
Yeah.
I can't tell you. So, but no, definitely want to talk a little bit of when our kids grow up and leave our home. It's a roller coaster of emotions. You were talking about having Emma there for a while before she got married. So that was a little tough.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not, you know me, I'm not the emotional one,
No.
Linda. You're the emotional one. But I was like,
I will second that motion. I will second that motion.
I thought maybe I'll get a little emotional just because talking about homeschooling and just, what we've got to do with our kids. And now, truly we've been sort of empty nesters, they've been in and out for the last few years, but this kind of feels like, the final empty nest.
So that's why we really asked you to come on, because I think that you could really give us some wisdom and perspective about the topic of homeschooling. So our subject today is really thinking of homeschooling. So things to consider before you really make that decision. And so, a lot of parents are out there weighing the pros and the cons of whether or not to homeschool. And even though it's only October, there's some kiddos who are like, Mom and Dad, get me out of here. I don't want to be in school anymore. I want to be homeschooled, because they kind of got a taste of it, right, during COVID. And so, we really want to give you some things to think about and to talk about. And we actually even had a young mom who really wrote into us, and she listens to us. And so she said, I would love it if you guys could handle this topic on your podcast, because I'm really weighing that. And my kids aren't even old enough to be in school. So I thought, I've got just the person, because, so we love for you guys to let us know if there's things that you want us to kind of tackle on our show, right? So
Yeah. So Lisa, one of the things that we encourage couples to do in the parenting process is to make sure you have verbally and just within your home established what the family values are. Right? No, because those are the foundation things that we build everything else on. And once you've established that, then you decide, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that we are working towards those? And homeschooling is a huge part of that. That's why so many parents, excuse me, will start to say, okay, in order for us to get our kids when they're 21 years old and they're getting ready to leave our house, how have we instilled these values in them? And so homeschooling is a big deal. And for that matter, any type of schooling, the choice that you make. So we're going to really go down that because, I worked in the public schools. Linda worked in a private school. And you worked in a homeschool. And so we have
but we were all teachers.
Approaches.
Lisa's a licensed teacher. So yeah.
So we are going to delve into this topic a little bit deeper, but before we do, we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Maxwell Construction and Casey's Outdoor Solutions for just allowing us to do what we do and encouraging our messaging. So please say thanks to those guys if you're in our neighborhood and you happen to run across their path. All right. So, Lisa, let's get to a little bit of background. All right. So you homeschooled your kids. All right. Were you homeschooled? Like, who gave you that bright idea to do that? How did that come about?
So, no, actually, I grew up in a public school. My husband was public school educated. So, definitely not something we had any personal experience with. I knew one family growing up that homeschooled, and I found that fascinating. Jason really didn't know anyone homeschooled, that homeschooled at the time. So, it was definitely not a personal experience.
Okay.
So what made you decide to homeschool? When did you guys make that decision?
Or even consider it?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, because Jason didn't have any experience with homeschool families, he was the one that really drove that early on. And it was prior to our kids going to school at all. I mean, well, I should preface that with saying they did go to preschool, went to Bright Christian Preschool, did that, both of them. Spent some time at Mrs. Mansfield's, getting some pre-K, kindergarten education there. But, he really said, I think I would like to do this. And I think...
Meaning him?
Yeah.
Or...
No, I think I would like you to do this, honey.
Yeah, it was more like, I really think we as a family should do this. Obviously, he knew that was, a lot of responsibility on me.
Yeah.
So I had to be on board,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So, and I think for him, he didn't enjoy school. Now, I will preface everything that I'm going to say today with saying, teachers are awesome. And I know so many teachers, and I think they do a fabulous job. So I don't want anything that I say to sound like I don't appreciate them. The institution and what they deal with is a little harder. But, Jason would say he had awesome teachers. I don't think he felt like the teachers were a problem. He's a typical boy, very active. He's hands-on. He wanted to be out doing. And so sitting in a classroom, and Merle and I, you and I have had this conversation before. Sometimes it's not the best setting for young boys who have lots of energy to be sitting at a desk, all day long. So for him, that was his initial, I think we should homeschool because, I struggled in this area.
And your oldest was a boy.
Exactly.
Yeah. A very active boy.
Active. Maybe not as hands-on as his father, but very active. But then also flexibility. I think for Jason, that was the biggest thought. He own our own business. So we had flexibility in our schedule. So he wanted that for our entire family.
Yeah.
I loved school. I was public school
educated. I can't imagine that. Lisa's very bubbly and social if you didn't realize that.
That's why we invited her on. And a teacher by trade. Like you were trained as a teacher.
Right. So I loved school. I had wonderful teachers, had great experience in that regard. So I wanted to be a teacher. I went got a college degree, got my teaching certificate, ultimately didn't use that for teaching, ended up at home. And there were, I think most Christian families that decide to homeschool would say it's because they want to make sure their children are getting that biblical worldview. Right. So that was probably overall the initial reason, for me ultimately deciding to do that at home. The other thing for me is just that I wanted my kids to have the opportunity to be who God intended them to be without all the expectations and, peer pressure that gets put on them to be like everyone else.
Right.
So not that I wanted to shelter them from real life. That was never my goal. It was just let them develop into who God wants them to be without those pressures to be what everybody else says they should be.
So you have 2 sister-in-laws that are still in the trenches, Amy and Katie, and then, they still have kids in school age. And so have you talked to them about why they chose to homeschool?
Yeah. So we have family dinner almost every Tuesday after they go to homeschool. So we all were together, and I had a conversation with them. Katie, which is the oldest of the 2 sister-in-laws, did I say Amy?
You said Katie.
Okay,
I was going to say, I thought Amy was older.
Yeah, Amy's the oldest of 2 sister-in-laws. And
Katie is not going to be happy.
No, exactly. Well, they're both younger than me, so that's fine. But Amy, she said for her, it really came back to Deuteronomy 6, talking about the greatest commandments and that we're to impress those on our children when we're lying down, when we're walking
along. Yeah.
She said, if I'm not with them the majority of their life, how am I making sure that happens?
Good point.
Right. Yeah.
So for her, that was her reasoning. The younger of the 2 sister-in-laws, Katie, she was in the public school system, taught for years. And, so her oldest went to public school for a little while, but just having seen some of the situations, she was in a inner city school and just seeing some of that. And of course, having a sister and a sister-in-law homeschooling, she was
all
seeing
the cousins.
So she was seeing that and then ultimately decided to bring them home.
Yeah. So, it is a lot different than what I thought homeschooling was. There is such a community, right? There's such a community. There's a lot of support there. Give me some pros that you see as the homeschooling of today. Not like you said, isolated in the home with no support around you. Give me some pros that you would say to young parents considering homeschooling.
Right. So obviously homeschooling, there's so many different options. And there's a difference between what I would say is home education and school at home. Not saying one or the other's, necessarily better, but, COVID, people were schooling at home.
Yes.
They were not home educating.
Right.
Someone else was giving them curriculum. This is what you need to do.
Just open your computer.
Right. And there's students doing online. That's different than what, we did.
I've seen a lot of that these days.
Yes.
And I stumble with that too, because I'm like, that's not technically homeschooling just because it's happening in the home.
Right. And there's good there's reasons people may choose to do that. If it's a family that travels a lot, being able to have a computer and be able to do that wherever, just like we like working from home, if we can, do that wherever we go. So I'm not saying one, but what we did was home educated.
Right.
And I would say the pros definitely were individualism, right? Like there's not that everyone's going to sit behind a desk and everyone's going to learn the same way. So if I have 2 kids, I have the ability. Again, those teachers try to do the best for every child in their classroom. But the reality is you have 20 students or more in your classroom.
You got to aim for the average.
Exactly. And so there are kids left behind. There are kids being kind of held back because they could be excelling. So it gives the opportunity to be individual education. So that's huge. But then flexibility. I mean, my husband, that was big for him. Our son, that was one of his big take homes was the flexibility.
Mhm.
I mean, he had opportunities to do things that he could have never done in a traditional school setting. So that was definitely a big one. And then, I mean, I guess those are the two biggest things, pros.
Yeah.
And then
All
just
right, well,
having families
Now,
together.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate.
Mhm.
I'm going to talk about some cons.
Okay.
Just briefly.
No, I have a list of those too.
Because I was in the public school,
Right.
And as a teacher, but then as I would say an administrative counselor. In other words, I did counsel, but I also had to deal with a lot of whenever we would get new kids come in, I would be kind of their first filter that they would go through. And so, man, I had a lot of challenging homeschool situations. And I would just shake my head a lot of times, like, what in the heck? And so one of the things, I don't think a lot of parents realize how much work is really involved.
That's a con, but that's...
So I would have parents that would come in and they would bring their 1, 2, 3 kids in. And they would say, hey, we've been homeschooling for the last 2 years, and we've decided it's probably not quite for us, and we want to enroll them in. And so this is a true story.
Yeah.
I said, in one particular case, I said, well, can you give me some grades or records or grade levels so that I can just have an idea of where we can place these kids, not just based off of age?
Yeah.
And the mom said, do you have a piece of paper? And I said, well, sure. And I gave her a piece of paper and a pen, and she just wrote down their name, and she wrote down 3 subjects, and she put an A+ by each one. And she goes, there you go. There's her grades. And I was like, really? But at that, I don't know what the law is right now, but at that time, that was all the record that they had to provide. And so that was like, my head was spinning. And so that actually created a policy in our school that said that we get 30 days to come and basically assess the proper place for that kiddo.
Right.
And so those are some of the things that like made me have a not great taste in my mouth because I don't know what percentage of homeschool parents are excellent and great and do a fantastic job, but I know I saw more than my share that were not. And so, and I know we're going to speak to that. Like, I think some people jump in for the wrong reasons.
Right.
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cons. So what did you see? It is hard work.
I think in our conversation, I told you it was truly probably the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Not if you're truly home educating, just the cons, and my sister-in-laws were, they were like, well, honestly, the con is I got to be with my kid all day long.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why I wanted you to speak, because I didn't want, they're in the trenches still, right? So it's hard.
And it was, I mean, it's no different. If you're struggling, if your kid goes to public school and you're struggling with a teenager who doesn't want to get out of bed and doesn't want to do this, it's no different
it's
at home.
magnified times 10.
And you have to be mom and teacher.
Exactly.
And it's hard to wear the different hats.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was by far the most difficult thing I've done, but it's been the most rewarding.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't change it for anything. I mean, it's not easy being patient, and that's sometimes parents, people considering homeschooling will say, well, I don't think I could be that patient. Well, do you think every teacher that they encounter every day is super is patient with them?
Yeah.
We all have our moments, right?
Yeah.
So, and then, the con for a lot of people outside the homeschool world is socialization, right?
Yeah,
These kids are going to be awkward and they're, but my sister-in-laws were actually like, I feel like as the mom, socialization is more of an issue for me than it is my child.
Yeah.
Because she's stuck, I'll say stuck at home.
Right. Like not in the workforce, not having that interaction. So the same is true of parents as it is kids when it comes to socialization, is you have to be proactive about making the effort to do those things.
Yeah, for sure.
So
we've seen a lot, just as Linda was talking about before, it's changed so much in the last 20 plus years that now there are so many I'll just say clubs,
Co-ops.
organizations, co-ops, where so much of that social interaction, it used to be, well, we'll do our homeschooling and then we'll go to church on Wednesday nights and that'll be their social, but now it just seems like there's all kinds of opportunities for the socializing.
Yeah, there's even a homeschool convention, isn't there?
There is, yes.
Yeah,
Usually held in most of the cities have them.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little overwhelming. I avoided the convention at times because I wanted to buy everything, right? Like, that's great. That curriculum's great. And the reality is you can't use it all.
Yeah.
So,
So we want to move on. And I got one more question for you, but I'm going to save it to the end. We want to move on to some things to consider before you make the decision. And this is really based on Merle and I's work over the years in the schools and also the coaching. And so we want you to really get a piece of paper and we want you to really answer these questions, whether or not you could say yes to these things. And so the first one is, are you and your spouse on the same page? You said you and Jason had that conversation, but if that would have been a great idea for Jason, but that was not what you wanted, that would have not gone over well, right? I mean, that would have just built resentment for you guys. And so it's really important that you guys hammer that out and work through that to come up with an agreement that you both are happy. And don't just say yes because you know that's what they want.
I'll say to that too, that yes, it's critical that we're on the same page, but then how implementation, because yes is a very easy thing to say.
Yeah.
But in your case, Jason said, yes, I'd like to do this, but you then, well, how are we going to actually implement it? Because that's in the trenches. So that's not probably just a sit down at the table one-time conversation. That takes a lot of, okay, what are we going to do here?
Yeah. And so we'll get to that one in a second. So you got to answer yes to that one because otherwise you're going to cause more division and more strife in your family and your marriage. Number two, and this is a really important one that we're seeing a lot of, and that is this your decision as parents or is this a child driving the decision? Because there's a lot of kids out there that get up early and get on that bus that would love to be laying around in their pajamas and get up at 10 a.m. and only do a couple hours of work a day. I mean, that's what they hear homeschooling is. And that's not the reason why you should decide to homeschool.
Yeah. What is your thought on that, Lisa? Because we see it on a regular basis now where kids, and it was even before COVID, but COVID was like putting gasoline on it, where they start to show a heavy, poor attendance rate at school. They can't get it moving. They can't get out of bed. And so the next thing you know, the school's calling them and saying, hey, where's little Joey at? And Joey's finally starting to say, I want to be homeschooled. And it never even came from the parents. The child initiated.
Yeah, what would you say to that?
Oh, it definitely needs to be parent initiated. Like you can't just... like I said, it's hard. If you're really going to do it right, it's hard. So if parents are working, both parents are outside the house, how are you going to monitor that?
Yeah.
I definitely think you have to, it has to be parent driven and parents have to be extremely involved.
Yeah. And here's what I've seen, and this is really happening, especially with our teens and preteens, is it's coming out of a place of anxiety or being overwhelmed. And that's not going to get better being homeschooled. They're still going to have homework and tests and grades. And so that's something that you've got to get your child help for, not just say, okay, well, I guess I'll quit my job and I'll homeschool you. Right. So please don't let that be the driver. So the answer to that one is it's got to be your decision as parents for the right reasons.
Yeah. When you mentioned the anxiety thing, and Lisa, this is one of the things that you're kind of we talked about earlier is ultimately our job is to prepare our kids
and equip
to
them.
be out in the real world. And that's from their faith, but also just their skills and their tools of how to interact. And, I personally have struggled with anxiety throughout my life. Right. And I know that you can't just hide. Those are called phobias. Okay. Yeah. And so you've got to get a plan for how you're going to charge into and confront. And so when your child is saying, I'm half sick about going to school, I don't like it, all these things, it's better to address the anxiety as just an anxiety issue rather than homeschooling is the answer.
Right. And I can't tell you how many kids are manipulating that to make it look like if you loved me, If you were a good parent, you would give me what I want. I mean, that's happening, especially our girls. They're coming in my office and that's what the parents are saying. And I'm like, no, that's not the reason to homeschool. It's not the reason to pull them out of school. You just kick the can down the road and deal with it later in a much bigger area. Right. So yeah. So is your decision to parent or to homeschool, is it yours? So number 3, have you done your homework? And as we said, there's so many resources out there, so many options for co-ops and curriculum and stuff. And so, Lisa, would you be able to give any advice as to where parents should start? Like, as far as doing their homework goes, where would be a good place to start?
I mean, obviously you can research all kinds of things, but probably the best thing is to talk to a family that homeschools, visit a co-op. I mean, my sister-in-laws and I have been very open to talk to anybody who is considering it, just seeing if it works for you.
Yeah. You know what I like what you're doing right now, Lisa, and that is sometimes I've run into homeschool folks that are trying to sell it like it's the best thing ever. And you're really saying, well, you need to consider. Yeah. It may or it may not be. It's not a one size fits all. And I appreciate that because sometimes when it's being sold, then you're getting all the flowers on it, but you're not seeing the weeds.
Or guilted into it. Like if you were a good parent, if you loved your kid and you loved Jesus, that you would homeschool. And that's, man, you can't do that. So do your homework. I love that. Talk to somebody. And if you don't have anybody around you, we can connect you with some family. So reach out to us. Number 4, and this is a biggie we've already kind of touched on, is are you or your husband desiring to be the primary teacher? Like you can't just pawn it off on somebody. I mean, I've actually had parents were like, look around, like, can they join your homeschool family, and you've got to be ready for that. You cannot stick a computer in front of them and go to work all day. It doesn't work that way.
Linda, you and I were teachers by trade.
Yeah.
Our worst nightmare was to be at home with our kids all day and teach. And I mean, you could think less of us if you wanted to, but the idea of just being kind of in that stew all day and not being able to change out of parent versus teacher, and the patience part, and just so it was funny that our personality was like, that would be more than we could bear. Yeah. So, and here we are. We've got teacher certificates. But we're probably not the right mix.
One of the things in talking to my son about would he consider it, and he was like, definitely, if I have kids, I would consider it. Besides the flexibility thing, one of the things he said, which kind of like, as a mom, I'm like, oh, that's so awesome, was he said he feels like it makes us closer as a family.
Wow.
And, but it could do the opposite, right? Like
resentful.
There could be resentment, but he felt like it made us closer as a family. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Little Augie. There you go. He's not little anymore. He's an adult man.
But what's funny is he lives in Taiwan.
Yeah. That's what I said. For him to say that, knowing that he goes to the other side of the world, still made me like, he still feels that close.
Yeah. But here's the cool thing is that and this is what we say all the time, your goal is to raise well-adjusted, healthy adults who feel like they have the confidence and the ability to go across the world and share Jesus and teach English or whatever that is. You gave that to your kiddos. Yeah. And that's our goal, right? It's not to keep them in the nest forever or keep them under our thumb. And, as much as sometimes we want to do, the control freak in me, but that's not what God's asked us to do.
Yeah, obviously that was not my intent. My kid's gone to the other side of the world, but I think, again, allowing them to develop into who God intended them to be without that pressures, they are confident to do those things.
Yeah.
And I would say one of our greatest challenges and I think frustrations is kids coming to that 15, 16, 17, 18 years of age and go, I don't know what I'm good at. Whereas in the home
or I'm scared.
Yeah, or I'm scared, but just like I was one of those undecided school managers, right? Because you kind of get exposed to a lot of everything, but nothing with any depth to it. And so you really don't get to glean in deeper and deeper. And I think the homeschooling does offer that opportunity to say, hey, you really seem to be good with your hands. Like, let's get you in this guy's wood shop down here, or let's get you to study something at this, this center or something. So I think you have a better chance of having a better decision of what your gifts are by the time you are in those later years.
Yeah, because those are encouraged at home, where in another setting, they may be discouraged.
Yeah, you may not even touch on it. You may not even know that you're good at it.
Yeah,
exactly.
So here's your last question that if you don't answer yes to, you really have to wrestle out before you make a decision. And that is, will your child have healthy opportunities to build those relationships? And so school is the main way that most children get socialized. They learn those skills, working and sharing together, taking turns, standing in line, that kind of stuff. And so are they involved in some kind of outside opportunities, whether it be a co-op, which, man, I'm so thankful for co-ops, because it sounds like you get the experts to come in and teach the science and the math. And if that's not your strength, sometimes you can have that in a co-op. But, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, youth groups, Young Life, sports teams, there's got to be a place where your child is with their peers, right? And so what was that for your family? Where did they find that?
Well, being involved in a faith community was a huge part of that. But I mean, they went to work at, an earlier age. They had more flexibility there. Again, focused on what they're good at and finding places that they could do that. I mean, they were in gymnastics and dance and, Little League. And I mean, so there's so many opportunities, and actually may have a little more time to do those things when you're homeschooled versus being in a school setting, for those long hours every day. So you definitely have to be proactive.
Yes. Yeah. So if you've answered yes to those 5 different things, then I would say homeschooling could be a healthy option for you. But again, there is not one size fits all. And this is a personal decision that I don't want you to feel guilted by or obligated to do or, afraid of. We want you to make an informed decision that's best for you and your family. So Lisa, is there any final words of encouragement to parents or, anything that you would, say before somebody makes a decision to, whether or not they're homeschooling or not?
Yeah. So I think it's deciding, am I willing to put the work in? Because that's a big decision. And so you got to decide that. And I think one of the people who are considering, if you said yes to these questions and yet you're still hesitant, most of the time it's because you're going to say, I'm not equipped.
Right.
Well, the reality is, most of us are not equipped. And honestly, ironically, if your public education did not equip you to teach your children, was it an education that you would want to give your own kids?
Good point.
So don't say I'm not equipped. All through, I knew I was going to fail. And it was always my prayer, look, I'm going to do my best. God, you fill in the rest. Because I believe in gaps. You know, there's just gaps. So you got to
just like the public education does, right?
Exactly. It's not going to be perfect. Yeah. And, but I wouldn't let socialization affect you. The third thing our son told me, which again, I was shocked at, was he said he thought he got a better education. And I was shocked at that. He's not my studious child, right? You guys know him, right? Now, our daughter, she loved, but he, so when he went to college, I said, oh my, this is going to be a true test.
Yeah, exactly.
And what he found was those students that his peers in college who had been top of their class in school struggled in college more than he did.
Wow.
Because it was just a different setting. I don't feel like my public education equipped me for time management.
Yes. Study skills.
Study skills. So when you went to college, you felt underwater. And so I think that was what he saw too.
Yeah.
So don't, there's just so many things there, but you have to, it has to be, is this going to be what's best for us?
Because as Merle mentioned, there is homeschooling gone bad, where a parent just throws the computer in front of them or goes to work and has the child figure it out. It can't be done that way, to be giving your child the best chance of success. So well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming in. And
I'm sure you could have had tons more people better equipped to even answer these questions than me, but I appreciate you.
Lisa, something that comes out in you, and you prompted my thinking on this. Am I equipped to do this? And I think generally speaking, people think about, am I educated in the areas? Like, am I going to be good in my history and good in my math? And I think especially going up into the high school years, we have to be more concerned about teaching students rather than teaching subject matter.
We have to be more... It's also teaching them how to learn any subject matter.
And who they are in the learning process.
Exactly.
And so, because I always felt like, listen, as long as I'm tuned in with my students, as long as I can read, I can figure out, okay, this is what they're going to need. This is,
especially nowadays. Yeah.
And so it's not, you probably are ahead of them in terms of just what your knowledge base is, just because you're a little bit older. But now it's your job as a parent to say, how do I get this to them and make sure that it's connecting? And so I would say, even in the idea of when you're choosing even a public school for your kids, do your kids run into teachers that are concerned about how well they are doing versus, well, I gave you the material, because just shoving material, that's just like sitting your kid in front of an online schooling process. And so it's really like, how well does your public school teachers or your homeschool teacher, how well are they going to connect with what the kid needs?
Yeah. And the reason why, Lisa, I thought it was so important to have you is that you now have a little bit more perspective instead of somebody in the trenches where like your sister-in-law is like, it's hard, like I'm about ready to kill them, that kind of thing. And again, I'm just kidding. But the fact is that now you can kind of see they're adults, they're thriving. And, we do know that it's a personal decision, but it's not one you have to be afraid of. God calls. No, he doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. And so if you feel called and you and your spouse feel called to do this, God's going to give you what you need, and he's going to surround you with people that are going to help. So,
and the other side of that is if you're a parent who sends your kids to a public school or a private school, I think you have to be even more diligent about the time you have with them.
That's right.
Yes.
To make, to make sure you're getting
time
their
with
values
them.
and then quality time with
because
them.
that's going to be very limited. You have an hour and a half. In
Exactly.
the evening.
Exactly.
So we talked actually about God in the schools just last week in our a couple weeks ago in our show. And so we really encourage you to go back. If you do have a child in the public or private school, how do we incorporate our faith and our values into that education, into that day for them? So we really encourage you to go back and check that out.
All right. Well, Lisa, we want to thank you. Thank you for your insight and just your willingness to kind of share your experience. Guys, we hope that this particular show, if it was of interest to you, that's great. But you might know somebody that is entertaining some of this conversation right now. Please share the show, all right? And help us out by helping them out. Please share our shows. We greatly appreciate just all of the support that all of you give us. And so we just want to thank you for that. Do us a favor just for the sake of getting us up on the search engines. Give us a 5-star rating, make comments. And, as Linda said earlier, if there's something that is concerning you, your family, your marriage, shoot us a question, right? We would love to entertain it, maybe even have a whole show on it. And that's how this show actually came about. So we want to thank you guys. We also want to thank our sponsors, again, Maxwell Construction and Casey's Outdoor Solution, for continuing to support the Rock Solid Family Podcast. Hun, why don't you close us out? I think that's all.
Again, thanks, Lisa. Appreciate you. And thank you guys for listening to the Rock Solid Families podcast, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day.
Solid Families wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. Casey's has grown to be one of the largest and most unique garden centers and gift shops in the Cincinnati tri-state area. Whether you are looking to take on that next landscape project or simply add a little home decor to your house, Casey's has you covered. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Call them today at 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.